Hello, I'm Fedora Amos. I write Victorian whodunits with a touch of humor. I have a series of five Jimmy McBustle mysteries, which I'm now going to take her to a new place, take her on a grand tour of Europe. So I'm talking about two books today. First, the last of the first series, and this first of the second series. The last of the first series, the fifth book, is this one, Vanderbilt in Peoria. And it's set in 1899, St. Louis and Peoria, Illinois. When a little person is killed on the railroad tracks, young Nellie Bly wannabe Jimmy McBustle and her photographer steal away from the St. Louis Illuminator, the news, in order to get around the newspaper's true crime reporter. They're going to steal his story, so to speak. This sneaky act adds to the many reasons why people hate her at the St. Louis Illuminator. She's as popular with the staff as a porcupine in a punch bowl. Her boss can't fire her because she keeps on bringing in big stories, stories that sell newspapers and that increase the circulation. But he can send her out of town, and he does. This time it's to the grand opening of the sparkling new City Hall in Peoria, Illinois. Jimmy is in luck. She can hitch a ride with her uncle, who is now driving a brand new Doris automobile. Doris automobiles were the premier automobiles made in St. Louis around the turn of the century. And what's more, he has an offer to stay with an important judge in Peoria. Well, the St. Louisans find their host to be, well, eccentric, is a nice way of putting it. The judge's family lives in an outlandish home that out gingerbreads anything back in St. Louis. The lady of the house is way more than just eccentric in her fashion sense and in the fact that she talks to people through her basset hound. Well, no sooner do the St. Louisans arrive than another body is found dead on the railroad tracks. Well, Jimmy is determined to get her stories to the St. Louis Illuminator, and she investigates, which takes her through the dark halls of the Peoria Opera House and to the grand ball celebration for the new city hall. The story takes place against the pageantry of the actual grand opening of the Peoria City Hall on Thursday, January 5th, 1899. That handsome terracotta building still stands there today, and you can still see it. In fact, it's probably even more beautiful than it was then because it's had recently a multi-million-dollar renovation. Well, what does that have to do with Vanderbilt? Well, you see, at the turn of the century, railroad barons were crisscrossing the country with railroads from coast to coast. And Illinois was the focal point where all of these were supposed to come together. In fact, in Peoria. And William K. Vanderbilt, who was the chief of all the railroad barons, came to Peoria on December 8th, 1898. He stayed in Peoria, walking around, not speaking to anyone at all, for exactly 1 hour. Then he got back into his private train car and went back to New York. Well, what was he doing? Scouting out the railroad situation. Because long before the Securities and Exchange Commission made certain things criminal, they were perfectly legal. Like one ploy that the railroad barons used in order to suck up little trains like the Alton in Chicago was to buy up the stock. 95% of the stock Vanderbilt bought in the Chicago and Alton. And then they would issue bonds based upon that stock. And they would charge, of course, more than they got for the stock. And the profit they would refine, they would find within the next month, and it would be about 30% profit. And all of that completely legal. Well, then Jimmy is going to go on a tour around Europe, a grand tour of Europe in 1899. And that's the new series. And it will be starting with their trip, New York to London with Dr. Crippen. How exciting. Going on the poshest ship afloat. I can't talk today. And I was a former speech teacher, but nothing is coming out very clearly. Anyway, she is going to be on the poshest ship afloat, the Lusitania. And with it, on that same ship, is something quite amazing. A shipment of silver for the British Treasury to shore up their currency. And this was not a small shipment. It was 837,000 ounces of silver, worth, that's 57,000 pounds, by the way, worth about $15 million then, and well over $50 million now. And you know what? They advertised that that was going to happen in the New York Times. Well, you can imagine that that might whet the appetite of quite a few thieves. Well, Jimmy has her own dreams, of course. She wants to be her own person, which is why she has this job at the newspaper and why it's so important that you keep on writing great stories. This time, her rich aunt is taking her across the Atlantic. But not everything is smooth sailing. She has to put up with her Aunt Tilly, the Caligula of chaperones, who's trying to turn her into a proper lady. And there's a fellow passenger who bears watching. I don't know if you've ever heard the name Dr. Crippen. During this time, of course, it's far earlier than his later fame, or infamy, I should say. He did not become famous for another decade, but it was for something rather spectacular, especially in England at the time. It seems that he wanted to get rid of his wife and take his secretary over to Canada. Well, to do that, he did away with his wife and left her chopped up in the basement floor. And so those are the two books that I want you to know about. One of them is out now, The Vanderbilt in Peoria, which you can find on Amazon. And this one is coming next year. Fedora Amos at fedoraamos.com.